think I am not sure if you guys can see me or not. I am going to try and get in here and see this. Okay, let's see. Okay, here we go. I think we're working now. If you're having any trouble hearing me or seeing me, or if it's breaking up, hey Amy, nice name. It's good to see you. I'm glad you're here. If you guys have any trouble, let me know because Facebook's trying to tell me that things are not going well. I didn't have these notifications last time, so I don't know if it's just a traffic issue or what. Um, oh, yeah. Yes. So, Amy, that blanket, were you here in December when we did the big Christmas giveaways and stuff? I did a bunch of merch, or I tried to do a bunch of merch, I should say, for end of King of Beasts in December, and some of it was either too expensive or whatever. Anyway, that was a sample that I got, and with the image, it's really cool because it's the one of Reth reading, but the title got cut off, and it was super expensive. It was like $70 or something. So. Hey, Cervanthi, Marilyn, Michelle. Yay! I want to show you. I also got this is just I just got for myself, and I use this every day. And every time it's Reth and Elroth. And every time new people, like my cousins, came over a few weeks ago, and my cousin was like, "Who's the dude on your on your cup?" And I'm like, "It's my character." And he's like, "Is that a bear chest?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Anyway, that's my daily. Hey, so we've got Cervanthi, Janelle, Dominique, Caroline, Rachel. Thank you for coming, ladies. I'm sorry, I need to remember which camera is working because I was just using a different one for Discord. So, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. If you weren't in Discord, just so you know how this is going to work, I just did a video, or excuse me, a recording of our Discord conversation. That was answering a bunch of questions about the world of Anima, um, the sort of the writing of the story, how it came about, and a few different questions about the King of Beasts. Um, Here today, we're going to focus more on questions that come out of either the time that was between the two books, because there's 20 years between the two books, or Queen itself and the ending there. If you haven't read the ending, I have to put a spoiler alert up. Some of these answers are not going to spoil things for you, but some of them will, and probably some of the comments from readers and stuff too. So if you haven't read the ending and you want to be here, I appreciate that you're here. You're going to find out the ending though. I'm just going to put it out there. It's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. Hey, Angela. It's good to see you. So what we're going to do is I have a bunch of questions that you guys submitted. And the reason I got you to submit them ahead of time was so I could plan. If you're watching this later, what I'm going to do is, I believe it's either tomorrow or the next day, you're going to see a few chapters go up on Queen. 4 chapters. The first two are the written answers to these questions. So they're obviously briefer than what I'm talking through, and I'm going to try and answer, like, if you guys have questions, sort of knock-on questions from these ones. When I give an answer, you want to know something more, I'm going to try and answer that too. But if you don't want to mess with this, or you don't want to watch this whole video because it's going to be pretty long, You can go into Queen tomorrow or the next day. There will be two chapters posted that are Q&As, and they're the answers to these questions just in writing and brief. And then the next day, I believe it is, there's going to be two um, extra content chapters posted on Queen. If you're here now in the live and you're not a part of the reader group, the actual Facebook group here, get in there. I'm going to post the link in the comments because after we're done here, I'm going to post that extra content for you in advance. You're going to get to read it today. Um, and you're going to get a scene, a long scene that no one else is going to get, at least not yet. I don't know if or when I'm going to post it. It would be extra content for King of Beasts. It's not enough to use up the side story on, so it'll probably be posted there at some point later in the year when I do some other stuff. But for now, you're going to have it exclusively. Nobody else has ever read it, only me. So come on into the reader group if you haven't already, because we're going to have some fun stuff over there this afternoon. The other thing we're going to do, we're going to play a game at the end. If you're here, you will have a chance to qualify for merchandise. I have a bunch of leftover merchandise from both King and Queen, and I'm going to do little mystery packs for everybody. Because what's happened is, some of you were here in December and got stuff when we did the Christmas giveaways and the end of King of Beasts. Some of you have gotten stuff, at lives and stuff earlier this year. So if and when you're a winner today, I'm going to get in touch with you and find out what you already have so I can make sure that you get something that you don't already have. So I can't tell you what they are, but I can tell you that there's many different kinds, and I think you'll like them. They're all in some way either Reth and Elia or Aaron and Elroth related. Um, if you have questions when I'm answering the questions today, because they're written down, please feel free to put it in the comments. I might not see it. So keep putting it in there. If it relates to a question I haven't seen it, put it in again, and hopefully I'll see it the second time. I don't care if you're annoying, is what I'm saying. If you need to keep asking, because I love talking about this stuff, and I want to make sure that you guys all know all the things. And oh no, I already told you. So we've got some extra content as well, but that will come at the end. So I'm excited for you to read the extra content as well, Sravanthi. I was very excited to be able to have a chance to write it. There's not a ton, but there's a very, anyway, I like it. I like what you're going to see today, and I'm excited to be able to share it with you guys because, like I say, I'm not going to be able to put it on web novel for quite a while. So, we've already, if you missed the Discord discussion, it will be on my YouTube channel. My YouTube name is Author Amy, and that will be posted probably this evening. I'll try to put a post on my page and in the group a link, but if you just want to look me up and follow my channel, it's Author Amy. You can search Author Amy Reth. You can search Author Amy King of Beasts. It usually comes up. There's some video content on there and a couple readings and things like that, and some other live chats that we've done. So let's get into it. I'm excited. You guys seriously have the best questions. Like, I was impressed. Like, these ones made me think, or a lot of them did. So the first one is, how did Elia manage being queen with young kids back to back without her advisor and best friend? So this relates to the time between the two books when Elia was raising Elroth and Gar. And Gari was stuck in the human world most of the time. So I do want to say, which you probably, if you've read the end of King, you've probably seen it. Elia was pretty stressed out. Raising children in Anima, especially children that can shift, is not a straightforward equation. So that was a new and exciting experience for her. So it was stressful, but I would say if you're kind of relating this to human terms, not as stressful as you would think, not as stressful as it would be raising them in our world. There's two different key ways that the anima live and work, that relates to this, that made it a little easier on her. The first is that they believe, just like Gari was explaining to Elia at the beginning of King, as animals do with each other, they teach by observation. So they believe that the best way for children or offspring to learn is to watch, and basically to be involved in everything. So if you, and I'm relating this to, like, because I grew up with horses and dogs and stuff like that, whether you're a dog pack or a horse herd, the way that young learn how to do things is through exploration and through observing adults. And the good parent adults will moderate their offspring's behavior when their offspring get it wrong. But most of the time, what they do is just bring them along for everything, and let the kids figure it out as they go by watching and being a part of it. And that's something that has stuck in the anima culture. They believe that the best way for kids to learn and grow is to be around adults all the time and just be involved in what's going on. This is part of, it's not the whole reason, but it's part of the reason why anima kids develop younger. Physically, they develop younger because they're bigger and stronger, but that comes again from the animal side of their nature, genetics. But the mental development of anima is also faster. And that's because they have more independence earlier. So they have a beast form right from birth. And that means that often they're mobile, and capable of things that a human baby is not capable of. So you get to see that at the end of King with Elroth. When she's a baby, she's wrapped up, she's swaddled, she's in a crib, she can't do anything. But when she shifts into her lion, she's already capable of jumping and running. And yes, she's stumbling, just like we see with baby animals. It's not that they're fully capable. She is a cub, but as a cub, she's a lot more capable than she is as a human baby. So anima children tend to spend quite a bit of time in their animal forms, and it also means that their parents don't worry about them as much because they're stronger, they're faster, they're more capable. As babies, they're not as helpless. So on the one hand, while having children that can shift was very stressful for Elia, because she has that natural mother's instinct of, my 3-month old is about to leap off of a table, you know, problem. That was very stressful for her. But on the flip side of that, if my 3-month old is running around the house, I don't have to worry about her getting stood on. She's a cat. She can do that. So there was kind of an upside to that. Secondly, the anima as a society, as a culture, they really do believe that the offspring are part of the tribe, so to speak. So when and I take this, I have a really big extended family, and I saw this as a kid without really realizing that's what I was seeing, and I see it even more so if you look at the more tribal cultures in our world. There's this idea in a lot of these places that children are, they say it takes a village to raise a child. Very, very true in anima. So if Elia and Reth go to the market for dinner and they've got the kids with them and the kids run off, Elia does not have to go running after them. She knows, or she's learned over time. She didn't know this at the beginning, but this was sort of the process. Um, you learn over time that the wider community is going to watch over your kids for you. They're going to let you know if there's a problem. They're going to help your kids if the kid needs help. So that happens primarily in the tribe. So for Reth and Ely, obviously that's the lions, but it also does just happen in the wider community as well. But it's more that because the tribes have different ways of dealing with things and the kids have different issues and different ways of teaching. For example, if an equine saw a lion cub out and looks like they're going to get in trouble, they'd be more inclined to go get another lion to help them unless it's an emergency. So they're going to help and they're going to reach out and they are all corralling all the kids. The kids all mix and mingle, but within the tribes they spend more time together because they're learning the same things and they're having the same problems and they're having to learn their beasts and all of that. So what Elia had to learn, and this was something that Reth kind of had to walk her through, because initially he didn't realize how stressed she was, and you see that a little bit um, at the end of King, that to him this is all normal and natural, that my 3 month old can launch herself off a table. To Elia, that's not. And over time, as we know, Reth can be a little bit oblivious, but over time he kind of figured out that she thought whenever the kids were out of the house and she was with them that she had to be corralling them and she had to be watching over them. Very hard to do in a society where there's 200 300 people at a meal and your kids are running in and out of tables and they're switching in and out of beast forms and all of that. So he was able to kind of coach her and say, "Hey, this is how it works here. Look, sit here. Don't run after them. Watch what happens when Elroth runs down the stairs and trips on her face, and Amor is there or somebody else." So that she could kind of get a feel for how this works and learn to trust the tribe and the community to be a big part of her kids' lives. So once she kind of got a handle on that and understood how that worked, it got a lot easier for her. When you see her at the end of King, she hasn't really learned that yet. She's definitely getting help from Amor and Holly and some other people, but she was functioning in much more of the human way of doing things. But that had its challenges for her and stuff too, because to her, I should be the one to put my kid to bed, whereas the Anima are like, "Oh, your kid was tired. I put them to bed for you." They just kind of do it all. So that was challenging for her as well. But generally, she would have the kids with her wherever she went anyway. So either if she had a meeting, for example, with the Women's Council, because she's at that point the only one who's got little kids, they all just come to her. So the meeting's at her cave, and they fully expect that the kids are there and around and getting into trouble and need to be managed while that's going on. And again, they will help. Like, she doesn't have to do everything. She doesn't have to host everybody and look after the kids and be a queen at the same time. They'll kind of help her juggle all of that. But on the flip side, too, if she does have to go out or she does want to go out, the Anima fully expect that you bring your kids with you. So, because Elia was more human in that way, her and Wrath would kind of split it a little bit. I think there's a time in the book that he actually talks about how they always tried to make sure that one of them was there with the kids. But Anima would be more inclined to leave their children as well, because especially as once the kids are sort of 4 or 5 years old, those kids at 4 or 5 would be out running around in packs by themselves without adults a lot of the time. Um, and that would be normal and natural to them. Because again, everybody's watching out for them, but also the kids have learned boundaries a lot earlier and they've learned self preservation a lot earlier and they understand cause and effect a lot earlier because they have these double existences. So they've had to learn those things to be able to function. So basically, Elia was stressed, but she was far more able to balance that because of all the help that she had, and also just because the way their society works differently. So she doesn't have to leave her kids at the cave while she goes to a meeting. She just takes them with her. And they all expect that. You don't get to see that. I realized when I got that question. You don't get to see that in the book because they're always in a place where their peers either don't have kids or are older or whatever, and their kids are already grown. So you don't actually see that interaction. And that it wasn't until I was writing the answer to that question that I was like, oh, I should have shown that more. um, so the next one. Did Reth or Elia ever try to help Aaron before El became friends with him because he's Sully's nephew? So, I think I've said this before. I think if you've been in one of the chats before, you might have heard this one. Reth was very aware right from the get-go with Charon when he banished Charon, even before he knew what had happened to Charon. He felt responsible, or at least as a king and as a you know father to be, he was very aware that he was effectively placing a verdict on the whole family, not just on Charn. And he did give them the option to leave. Charn did not want them to leave because, as we know, Charn was not a bad guy. So he didn't want Dolores and Aaron to leave Wildwood. He did not want them to go to the wolves. So he left them, hoping that somehow this would all work out. And as we know, it didn't. So from the minute he left, Reth was aware that he now had a female and cub who were alone. He knew that the wolves that still existed, and while there was a little, much smaller number, but they were still there. He knew that they would help those two, but he also knew that they didn't have the resources. There was all these tensions between the tribes at that point, and all that sort of stuff. So right from the beginning, Reth had people keeping tabs on them, making sure they had things they needed, keeping an eye out, because he also does have to watch Dolores and make sure that she's not, not a traitor, that there's not going to be a problem. He didn't think that she was, but he has to be aware of that. So there was kind of a dual purpose to it. One was to keep tabs on her, the other was to just make sure they stayed safe and provided for. So he was aware the whole time, but he wasn't sort of one on one jumping in and being like, hey, how's it going, Aaron? Because he's king and he has to keep a certain amount of distance because obviously can't do that for everybody. But what he did do was have people near him, and he was giving them instructions and things to do to take care of them. So he was aware and, yes, doing things to help them right from the beginning. But on top of that, when Elroth brought Aaron home, because of this, he's now, what were they? I think Aaron was 12 at that point. So Reth's already been aware of him and his development. They've already had interaction because Aaron's done a little bit of training and stuff like that. It's not that Aaron had never met him before. Obviously, everybody gets to meet Reth and Elia, and everybody's very close together. Um, but they hadn't developed a personal relationship. And this was definitely something that both Reth and Elia were very intentional about, was developing that personal relationship with him and being a provision to him. So Elia saw that when Elroth brought Aaron home, that this was an example of Elroth's heart, and her compassion, and they wanted to encourage that. And she felt really bad because she, right from the get-go, was pretty sure Charm was a good guy, and she didn't like that things worked out the way they did. So she was very intentional about kind of embracing Aaron and also getting to know Dolores, which she'd already done a little bit, but that opened a door to be able to be more engaging. But as we know, Dolores was also isolating herself a lot, so there was a limit to how much of a relationship they were able to develop. But Reth, right off the bat, as soon as Elroth brought Aaron in, Reth was essentially doing everything he could to make sure that Aaron knew that he had a place, that he was safe, that Reth would, be kind of a father figure to him. He expresses, and I'm sure you guys like me love the scene where Reth talks to Aaron about his dad and about Reth's heart for him and wanting to be not replacing his dad because he knows that he can't, but more um, helping in that space. And that was a goal he'd had since Aaron was little. So that was really real for Reth when Aaron started spending a lot of time with Elroth and being around the cave a lot and stuff like that. He did everything he could. Aaron's sort of I don't know if you guys remember, but it always stuck with me right in the opening chapters of Queen. Aaron expresses in his mind, he's narrating, that he still at that point doesn't see himself as part of the family, even though they all see him that way. He's very close to the family. He knows he's welcome in the family. But like that interaction that happens between Elroth and Reth and Elia right after Elroth's taken dominance, Aaron's first instinct is that he needs to not be there, that he's sort of intruding on this family moment, whereas they're all like, you're a part of this. It helps that Elia and Reth knew knew that they were mates and was like, "Come on, kid." Um, so that helped definitely. Um, but also, I don't know if you guys caught it. For me, it was important. There's a moment, I think it's at the veneration. It's towards the end anyway. There's, oh, no, no, no. It's when they've found out that the humans are coming. There's all this bustle and all this stuff going on at the cave. And I think it's when Elia and Ruth had gone off to find out what their purpose was going to be to sort of solve this whole human issue. But there's a moment where the family comes together and it's in the middle of this crowd. And Aaron looks at them, and his gut instinct, just for a second, is to leave them to it because it's a family thing. And then he's like, oh, wait, no, I am a part of this. And he kind of, because Elroth's like, get over here. Um, and that for him, it's just a little moment, but for me, that was really important to show that he was finally understanding and finally embracing the idea that he was part of this pack, like he's part of this family, and that this family, it's right for him to be there and be a part of what's going on. Um, oh, so several people asked about the story of Gar's birth, and did Elia have to deliver him in her lion or in her human, and was it a more positive experience? So don't hate me. I'm not going to answer this properly because this is a story that I hope to tell as a side story at the end of King. What I'd really love to show you guys is the whole sort of coming together of that entire situation. So I'm not going to give you details. Sorry. But I do want to tell you that even though Gar was a handful as a baby, Elroth was actually worse, partly because Elia was less knowledgeable or less practiced. So by the time she had Gar, she'd been through it all with Elroth before, so she wasn't quite as freaked out about everything that was going on. But also, Gar, I don't. I know that we didn't get deeply, deeply, deeply into the issues between Gar and Reth in the book. I didn't have as much time to really lay that out in the flashbacks and stuff as I wanted to. But that whole way of there being a problem between those two, I hope you guys picked up. There were several references where both Gar and Reth remember the earlier years when there wasn't a problem. So they didn't really develop issues until Gar was going through puberty. In fact, I think even a little later. I think things got really bad when Gar was about 14. But until then, certainly up until he was sort of 12 or 13, things between Gar and Reth were actually very good. And Gar kind of hero worshipped him, especially when he was really little. Both of them did. Both of them had that sort of, thing for their dad when they were little. Um, so in terms of the, I guess the struggles with Gar, they didn't really start till he was a teenager. So up until then, in terms of the family dynamics and stuff, things were very good, and there wasn't the disconnect until Gar got a little older. Part of that was because um, Gar is very dominant, and he's male. And Reth, up to that point, until Gar sort of hit puberty, they could see Gar's dominance right from the beginning. Like it was very clear with both of their kids. They were extremely dominant personalities. They knew that right from when they were little. Reth fully expected it. Like he's a big dominant guy, and Ely is very strong. He's like, we're gonna have some strong-willed kids. Like he knew that. He was comfortable with it. He liked it. But what they could see in Gar early on was that dominance was developing in a way. Now, Elia, I think, actually understood it better than Reth did. Reth didn't understand about himself that his instinctive reaction to a dominant male would be different than his instinctive reaction to a dominant female. So he's raising Elrith, going through everything with Elrith first because she's older, And he thinks he's got this down. He knows how it is. He's not struggling with it. He's really excited for her to be strong and successful, like he's her biggest advocate. What he didn't see in himself was that when his son hits those same kind of milestones and those same kind of moments in his life and has a very strong dominance, that Reth's male instinct is to stifle that or to dominate that in another male. And so part of the disconnect that happened between those two was because Reth's reacting without even realizing that he's really doing it. And also because Elroth's a different personality. Things that worked for Elroth, any of you that have more than one kid, you'll know. You do things with one kid and then the next kid comes along. The same things don't always work. And again, Reth with his whole Mr. Oblivious thing, he's like, well, we know how to do this, you know. And off he goes with Gar, and it doesn't work all the time. Not everything is the same between the two of them. So there was a lot of things that kind of brought the problems between those two, but they mostly happened later. Both Elia and Reth could see how strong their kids were, and they wanted to fuel that. They wanted that to, they fully expected their kids to take dominance when they were adults. So early on, um, I think I think I had it in my notes that early on Elia thought Gar would be the one when he was little because he's a year younger, which isn't a big difference in human, but in anima development wise, especially in their animal forms, that's quite a significant change. So she always could see sort of what stages were coming for Gar. And because he's got this older sister who's very strong and very accomplished and very capable, and he's doing the typical younger sibling thing where if they can do it, I can do it too. And a lot of times he could. He's male, he's bigger, he's stronger, just naturally he is physically more capable at the same age than Elroth was. So he could keep up with her. And so I think early on Elia was like, whoa, like if he's already doing all the things she's doing a year earlier, man, he's gonna be a big guy. He's gonna take, and she's looking at her husband who's massive. Gar was fully expected by most of the society to be the one to take over from Reth, and that's part of what the problem was, is Gar didn't want that position. And Reth could not understand why he wouldn't. And so, that was a disconnect for them as well. Um, Becca asked, what were Elia's and Reth's proudest moments for their kids, and what were Gar and Elroth's proudest moments for their parents? So, hands down, you definitely, no doubt, you got to see or at least hear about the proudest moments that Elia and Reth have for their kids. So, Elia, I'm going to do the two parents because the two parents are different. So, Elia's proudest moment of Gar was when he learned, without her knowledge, when he learned the secret of the disformed and what was going on. He overheard a conversation between her and Gari. And he went from this kind of mischievous little rebel. She knew he had a good heart and she knew he was strong, but he was also kind of wasting himself. He was drinking a lot. He was being a goof. He was being a rebel. He's leaving the house. Like, he just wasn't doing great. Um, and for Elia, seeing him kind of man up all of a sudden and be like, this is a big deal and I need to do something about it and I need to be involved. That just, for her, she was just like so proud and so happy because it was a combination of him making a good choice, but also him sort of stepping into what she knew he was, which was a very strong, very dominant male. And at that point, he had been just kind of being like, whatever, just really just letting life go because he didn't want the responsibility. So when he stepped up and took responsibility and started actively trying to help others, that appealed to her compassionate side that we've always seen from her right from the beginning, but also just her love for her son. Like, he's doing something that he is going to be successful at. She's very, very proud of him for doing that. Elia's proudest moment for Elroth as a child was when Elroth brought Aaron home. Because, like I said, for Elia, that showed Elroth's heart. She was young enough at that point that if she had been a little bit judgmental, or if she had been a little bit sort of, I don't want to, I don't want people to think I'm associated with that, they wouldn't have liked it. They certainly hadn't raised their kids to be that way, but they would have understood at 8 years old if Elroth hadn't sort of got that down yet. So for Elia, she was so happy and proud when Elroth brought him home and was like, "This is my guy," because she knew that that meant that Elroth was just like Reth, where she was so strong in herself that she's like, "I don't care what you think. I'm doing what I'm doing." Um, and she also knew, I think at that point they were starting to become aware, or at least Reth was already talking about Elroth being the one to take dominance, whether Elia agreed with that or not. So Elia was also hopeful that Elroth was going to be what she ended up being, which was very instrumental in changing things for the disformed, because Reth had definitely worked on that. He'd always spoken against that division, and he'd always, as an example, led with the unity and the equality. But he'd never taken that step of sort of, I don't want to say regulating it, but basically he'd never gone the next step, which was to draw a line in the sand and say, you will not, you cannot, you have to. And Elia very much hoped that Elroth, or whichever of the kids took over, would do that, because that was one thing that I have to say. Somebody asked me at some point, was there ever anything that Elroth and, excuse me, Elia and Reth didn't see eye to eye on? This was it. It was Reth was very much of the mindset that, this whole lead by example, learn by observation. I will show them how to do it. They will learn to adopt that. That was his way. And yes, you do see him. There's no doubt he knows how to give orders and make changes. But this thing of, and one thing that I love about Reth's observation of this, I think it's very true. Reth was of the mindset that if you force something on people, you change their behavior, but you don't change their thoughts. And you actually create, in some people, not all, in some people, you create a barrier where my behavior will I'll give in, I'll submit, I'll go along. But in my mind, I'm not. I'm actually resisting. And he thought that sort of subversive underground bigotry was far more damaging potentially to the society than allowing people to have the freedom to say what they really thought. Um, so he was one of the reasons that Reth never did this line in the sand thing was because he knew, yeah, absolutely, he knew he could draw a line in sand, he could make it law or whatever. He could force the society to treat the disformed differently. But he felt like in doing that, what you actually did was essentially highlight the differences and create this underground resentment. And he never wanted to do that. So he allowed the discussion to be very open. He was very clear with his disapproval of it. And he led in the way that he believed things should go, which was to treat the disformed exactly like he would treat anybody else. Whereas Elia and her kids were much more of the, no, 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 we need to actively, take a swing at this. Um, so yes, so Elia as an adult, or when Elroth is an adult, her proudest moment of Elroth was the veneration of the disformed, for both kids, I think, actually. Um, so Reth's proudest moment of Gar was seeing Gar become the alpha of the disformed, and that actually wasn't even about the veneration so much. It happened just before. But it was because he was seeing Gar in that moment the way Elia had seen him when Gar learned about the disformed and that whole sort of secret. It was, this is my son stepping into who he's supposed to be, right? Because Reth's known right from the beginning that Gar is extremely dominant, and he's been disappointed up to that point that, to his knowledge, Gar's never used what he's been given. In Reth's mind, the creator made Gar to be dominant and to be alpha. Um, and he's just not. He's not grateful. In Ruth's mind, Gar wasn't either grateful for what he had or didn't care enough about it. So when he saw Gar step up and become alpha of the disformed, he was really proud and excited because same thing. He saw his son becoming what he should be. His proudest moment for Elroth was definitely when she dominated him, which he baited her into. But it was because when she became queen, and it was because he'd always known she could do it. He's been talking to her about it since she was a kid. He's planned on it. He's essentially manipulated it a little bit. Um, but that's just like to him, that was a life goal, like not for him, for her. And he didn't. One thing somebody asked me was, did he give in to her easier than he would have somebody else? And the answer is no, in one sense. So physically, he was capable of continuing to fight, but mentally, he had hit the point in the fight where he knew that she was going to win. And she was going to win by um, being clever and being quick as opposed to physically being stronger than him because he's stronger than her. So it was a force of will thing. The reality was he wanted her to take it, so that would have eroded his will a little bit, and that's all part of dominance is the strength of conviction, right? That's why when you see, like when Reth's gonna go mess with the wolves that they imprison and stuff like that, there's different times that you'll see whenever any of the dominant anima is kind of prepping themselves for something. They talk about or they narrate about reminding themselves of their strength, and reminding themselves of their achievements, and reminding themselves of their goals and why they're going to win and how they're going to win and all of that kind of thing. Because they all know instinctively that dominance has as much to do about how you think as it does what you can do physically. You can physically dominate someone, but they're not submissive mentally. And Gar talks about that at the end of Queen with the humans, that the difference between a physical surrender and a mental surrender. So Reth's very aware of that. So when he's fighting Elroth at the beginning, he does not want her winning by default because he knows, A, that's not going to help her because she's not going to believe that she really did it. But also, the anima are going to see that too. And they're not going to believe that she really did it either. And then it is going to be this thing where he kind of passed the baton. And that's going to leave her in a much more shaky position in the society. So he had no desire to give up, so to speak. But he did want her to win. Like his heart was there for her to win. So I would say that he didn't give up in the sense that he didn't let her win. But had it been somebody that he didn't want in that position that had gotten him to that point physically, he would have fought to the death. So he would have done everything in his power to stop. If, for example, the likes of a Lucan, right, had taken that stab at him, had taken the actual challenge and tried to put him down, even if he was losing, he would have kept fighting. But whereas with Elroth, because she got to the point where she had dominance over him, and he wanted her in that position, then he was able to go, okay, I'll give up. So that was his most excited and proudest moment for Elroth. You asked about the kids being proud of their parents, and I have to say something that I've observed in humanity. Kids often don't actually understand the depth or the impact of what their parents do until they're older. So at this point in the story, Eller's around 20, Gar's around 19, 20, 21, 19, 20. Those are the ages that they are over the course of Queen. At this part of the story, they both love their parents, they both admire their parents, and they appreciate what their parents have achieved. But there is an element of this is just the way life is, and this is what adulthood is, and that they do their thing. So they're not up to the point of the end of the book. They're not sitting there going, wow, I'm so proud of dad for doing this thing. But both of them, I don't know if you guys caught it, but for me in writing those final the final chapters, the final 30, 50 chapters, um, where the kids have to let their parents go off to do this very big, very dangerous thing. Um, both of them become children again in that moment, and I don't know if that came across to you guys, but that was certainly how it felt to me. That when they had to send their parents off, it wasn't the queen and the war chief sending off, the former king and his mate and hoping that they win. It was a son and a daughter um, sending their parents off and knowing that they might not come back, and being kids in that moment. Both of them were kids, especially Elroth. Like Gar was a kid, but he was trying. He was trying so hard not to give in to that. But Elroth was just like, you know, it was. I have to say, I knew what was coming at the end of this book for months before I got to write it, and I was prepared. I was prepared to write it, so I was actually kind of excited to write it. But what floored me in the writing was actually the moment after all of that stuff has passed, when Elrith is by herself and grieving. Because, or at least, obviously she doesn't know everything yet, but when she's in that place of thinking everything is lost, right? Um, I hadn't thought through that whole place of being the child grieving for their parents. And I'd put so much thought and planning and sort of mental visualization and what Reth and Elia were going to say and what they were going to do and all this, like all of the events leading up to that point I had thought through in real detail. So they'd lost a little bit of their emotional impact by the time I actually wrote them, because it had become this very analytical breaking down of how I'm going to express this. But going into the Elrith scenes where she's by herself and thinking through all of this, I was crying. And it shocked me. Like it took me by surprise how emotional that moment was. And I realized it was because I went into it fresh. And that was sort of the culmination of all the things that had happened before in the conversations that Reth and Ella had with the kids. This is the moment where it all kind of comes home to roost. And, and that's where she's a child, she's a daughter, and she's broken by all of this. And it broke me. And it was really embarrassing because, like I say, I wasn't prepared for it. Normally, I know when I'm going to write something that's going to be really emotional. And I had made so much preparation for the earlier scenes. I think I'd kind of relaxed by the time I got to that point. I'm like, we're on the downhill run. It really hit me hard, hit me very hard. Okay, Caroline asked, what can you tell us about Sully's pregnancies and any of the protectors that mate with the anima that can shift? I'm curious about any complications since we saw that Elroth shifted in Elia during King of Beasts. Okay, so for Sully and Laren, her pregnancies and deliveries were stressful for a whole different reason. They are often a society by themselves. They have only very few people with them. And yes, she has great potential for complications. But even more than that, she doesn't have the, what do you call it, the backup or the resource. Elia had an entire kingdom around her, and they could call on people, right? So Sully doesn't have that. And she knows she doesn't have that. They had like a couple dozen tops, not even. I think they had like 12, 10 or 12. Um, so Sully already knew that if the babies shifted during delivery, it could be really bad for her and for them. And she also knew there was nothing they could do about it. They were not in a position to get help, and so she basically, it was a faith walk for her. She had to kind of try to prepare herself. So she spent a lot of time at the end of her pregnancies, all three of them, working to keep herself in a place that was very calm, and very I don't even know how to explain. I can feel how it felt for her. And it was about a there's a lot of prayer, a lot of kind of trying to stay in a place of peace so that she's not adding stress. Hey, Mary. She didn't want to add stress because she knew that the more stressed or frantic she was, the more likely the baby was to be shifting back and forth, and there was more complication for the delivery. So on the first hand, she was trying to keep herself in a place that was very peaceful and calm in the lead up to delivery so that she doesn't create more problem than is necessary. Secondarily, she spent a lot of time working with her babies, trying to see if she could have any effect on what form they were in, like if they shifted, because she could feel it later on. Um, could she? Was there anything she could do that would sort of encourage them back into human form and stuff like that? Um, so in the end, she obviously safely delivered. But I have to tell you, those deliveries were way harder on Laren than they were on her. There were some complications, there were some difficulties, but they got through them. But for Laren, he's in this position where he is terrified, the whole time leading up and during, terrified that something is going to happen both to her and to their child. This is his life goal happening in front of his eyes and happening in a very dangerous way. So he's just in pieces the whole time for like the last month of each pregnancy. But there was nothing he could do. Like he could not affect this at all. And that's a horrible place for a dominant personality to be when you know that there's this huge problem and you can do absolutely nothing about it. Um, so he was in the written notes I said he was an insufferable fuss. The last sort of month of her pregnancies, he just hovered, total helicopter husband. And then during the delivery, he was just a mess and trying very hard to help her and but she was far more calm and together about it than he was. Um, and so he was grateful. He was grateful to have three, but also like terrified. I shouldn't laugh. Because I'm in their heads and I have to kind of imagine what they go through. I just feel like Laren was that guy. He was like the father that would faint in the delivery room, except he can't faint. So he's just, is in pieces, just unable to cope, but has to. So he's holding himself together, basically, trying to help and probably making it worse, honestly. Um, I've had this one several times. Did Elroth really not realize that Aaron was her mate? I'm not sure whether my writing failed or whether it's just hard to swallow. Elrith is very much her father's daughter when it comes to being oblivious to things. So it never occurred to Elrith that Aaron was her mate. He was her best friend from when she was 8 years old. By the time she's 18, 19, 20, he is just a part of her. He's a natural part of her life. She trusts him more than she trusts anybody else. But she has, up to that point, she's not had any real sexual drive. She's not had any I don't know, it's just not on her radar. She's a busy girl. She's a practical girl. She's just doing her thing and she's not thinking about it. And when she does think about it, it's always in this context of pressure from other people because she's not personally driven. And before you say that never happens, part of Elroth is based on a friend that I grew up with in high school who just wasn't interested in a relationship all the way. And I remember being like, how can you be surrounded by all of these? And I was like, are you gay? Like, is there a thing? Like, is there a reason? Are you hiding? You don't have to hide. Talk to me. It's fine. Like, tell me. Because I didn't believe her that she just wasn't interested. But it turned out she really just wasn't interested until she was like 18. And then all of a sudden she had this interaction with this guy that we had known since we were like 11. And it's all downhill from there. But for her, she just wasn't there. I don't know if it was hormonal or what, but she just wasn't interested. And it wasn't like she wasn't turned off. It wasn't that she was attracted to something else and didn't want to admit it. I tried to have that conversation with her. She just didn't have any sexual drive. And without that, she was very happy with her horses and her sport and her stuff that she was doing. Until like I say, and to hear her describe it, it was a situation. Actually, it was the last year of high school, and we were all in PE, or they were, I wasn't there. And they had this like collision, and he like landed on her. And she said she was laying there, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And she's just like, all of the sudden, she's like, it was like her body like woke up and went, "Hello, there's something here." And she said it went from there for her. And until that moment, she utterly clueless and couldn't, like, all that we used to all be like, "Oh, come on, you must like somebody." And until that moment, just nothing for her. And then all of a sudden, boom, it was all on. And and I'd never been able to comprehend that because I'd been interested in guys since I was like 10. Um, so I'd never understood somebody who was in that mindset, but as an adult talking to her and going through, I found it really fascinating, and I asked her all kinds of questions about what it was like, being that. So anyway, I didn't mean to, but when it came to Elra's story, that ended up informing her story a lot. Was just that she just didn't think about it and just didn't care and was just doing her thing until the moment when she kind of woke up and went, "Oh." I do see that there were probably two or three moments earlier on in Elra's life when Aaron became sexually active and was with other females. But what it was Elroth didn't understand the feelings she was having. What she was having was a little bit of jealousy or a little bit of insecurity about potentially losing him to one of these other females. But because she is so sort of mentally practical, she just kind of went, "Well, that's not supposed to." She's a lot like Reth that way, right? I've got this uneasy feeling, but I know I'm not supposed to have the uneasy feeling, so I'm just not going to have the uneasy feeling. She just kind of went, "I'm not supposed to, go for it." Like she and many times literally meant it too. Was just like, "Do your thing," Didn't care because she didn't care. Everybody else was way more invested in this whole thing than she was, and she did not understand why. She couldn't understand why all of them were so fixated on this stuff. So the fact that she knew that he had this interest just generally, and she didn't, she was kind of like, "Go do your thing," because she's also got that human aspect of being a little bit squeamish about the whole thing and not wanting to be naked and not wanting to be, overly sort of out there, and not wanting to be around people who are. So for her, whenever this kind of stuff was happening, when the flirting was happening, when people were starting to couple up and stuff like that, she's always like, "I'm going to go to bed." She just was not wanting to be around that. So yes, she really didn't realize that he was her mate, but boy oh boy, when she did, it all came out. um, if Elroth had died, who would have taken Alpha? I had to think about this one, and I keep going back. Or when it first came up, my first thought was Aaron, and then I went, "No, it'd be Gar," and then I went, "No, no, it'd be Aaron." Well, and I just was doing that, just back and forth and back and forth. Um, and I'll tell you why. In my mind, uh, the only two options would be Aaron and Gar because they're the two most dominant males in the society aside from Reth. Um, and but they're dominant in very different ways. So Aaron is a dominant mind in the sense of, um, if he was human, we would say he's mature beyond his years or he's an old soul. He's one of those people who very observant about life, very he's able to analyze things and understand things. And especially when there are things outside of himself, he can be very, very thoughtful and understanding and very certain, right? So mentally, he's the more solid of the two, although you wouldn't see it because he's very self doubting. The self doubting was kind of pushed on him by society and by the growing up without his dad and all of that kind of stuff. that was nature versus nurture. His natural state, which you got to see with him at different times, when he kind of put aside his angst and just reacted to things, he reacts very well. He's very strong, um, very wise. So on the one hand, Aaron is the better mind, I guess, or the stronger conviction, whereas Gar is just he's like Reth in the sense of being extremely he doesn't have to think things through. He just has great instincts, very strong, very self-confident. He's just going to do it. That's just the way it has to be done. Um, so in terms of his dominant personality, his strength comes out of just knowing who he is and being okay with that. That was part of why his conflict with Reth was so hard for him, was because he knew inside that he's not a bad guy, but he felt like his dad couldn't see it. So then he got all kind of up in his own space about, well, I won't show it to him then, and kind of added to the problem. But anyway, so Gar's got kind of the physical slash the personality, I guess, is the best way to say it, for dominance. So the two of them together would like be even stronger than Wrath. They have like, but anyway, so I went back and forth in my mind about which it would be. Um, but the reality is that Gar is a little bit more erratic. He's a little bit more aggressive, a little bit of a stronger tendency towards violence, whereas uh, Aaron is much more thoughtful and would use words before he would use physical interaction. And he learned to do that by being disformed and knowing if this guy shifts, I'm done, right? So he had to learn to engage people and persuade them effectively. Um, so even though Gar is probably the more dominant in terms of his presence, I guess is the way to say that. When Gar walks into a room, everybody notices. Um, but his heart was never in that kind of leadership. He's a leader, absolutely he's a leader, but he's not drawn to the kind of political side of that or the societal side of that. He wants to be a person that people follow. Whereas Aaron, having sort of experienced bigotry and just the injustice of life a lot more, very much more interested in affecting change, right? So Gar will affect change because Gar wants the world to be right. Aaron's intentional about affecting change because he knows the world is wrong. So I think when it came down to it, Aaron would have ended up, if something had happened to Elroth after she'd taken dominance, I do think Aaron is the one who would have stepped in. I mean, he was her second anyway, so he would naturally step in the interim. But I think even without that, he that's where he would have ended up. Lots and lots of people asked if Elroth and Aaron's daughter Leah is a wolf or a lion. She's a lion, and she is very much her mother's daughter. If Elia had been there to see it, it would have been, now you know how it feels. um, Everybody asked, did Gar and Rika have kids, and if so, are they anima or human? So I'm taking it was phrased in different ways, but everybody wanted to know if they had kids. Everybody wanted to know what they were and what their names were. And this is, I'm sorry, another one that I'm not going to answer because this is one that I hope to tell as a side story. So I'm not going to tell you any of that, but I am going to say, just to give you a little smile, hopefully, the fact that there is a story to tell should tell you something. Um, Nikki and a couple other people, and I'm sorry I didn't get everybody's names. They asked me, will Tarkin or Reese ever get mates? And is Reese's mate? Excuse me. Is Reese the mate of Laren's daughter? So yes, both will get mates. Yes, Reese is Laren's daughter's. I think it's Lindra, uh, her mate. And there's a really interesting dynamic in that family because Reese grew up human, but he's Anima. So a lot of his body language and kind of way of functioning comes across much more submissive and much more weak than he actually is. And it wasn't until he got into Anima and stayed for a time that he started to understand that he was viewed very differently than he actually is. Um, but he's very dominant. You got to see his strength when he very quickly figured out that the humans were trying to trap Rika. And so he effectively or was willing to sacrifice himself to sort of save that whole situation. So Laren's daughter is attracted to him because he's a lot like her dad. He's a lot. So Laren was a very reluctant hero, right? He actually didn't want to be alpha, but he also knew he was better at it than the others, so he did it anyway. And Reese is a similar kind of, he's naturally much more insular and much more humble and doesn't need, he does not have a need to lead. But he is a leader in the sense that he's a dominant personality. He's got a great strength of conviction in terms of right and wrong. So, subconsciously, she was very drawn to that. But it creates this weird kind of thing because Laren, although he is a reluctant leader, is anima and is dominant and measures people on that scale. And he had to get used to the fact that his son-in-law, son of the flames, um, presents very differently than he actually is. And so it took some time for them to see Reese's strength. So there was some, I don't know, an adjustment period for everybody involved there. Um, Tarkin, I had originally planned to give him his own book, or at least he was one of the ones that I was gonna let you guys vote on it. If had there been a third book, Tarkin was one of the. It was gonna be. I had Laren, Gar, and Tarkin, and I ended up with Laren and Gar giving them their own perspectives so that you could basically see their story. But part of the reason I gave Gar his own perspective in the story was because at that point I knew that there wasn't going to be a third um, anime book. There wasn't an audience. There wasn't enough of an appetite for it. So then that made it a lot easier to make the decision whether or not to make Gar a point of view character. So Tarkin was the other one. He's the one who I didn't get to tell his story. Um, and I would love to tell his story. I don't know if it will ever happen. But because I would love to tell his story, all I'm going to tell you is that yes, he does have a mate, but I'm not going to tell you where or how. So that if I ever get to write it, you can see it because it's a pretty cool story. Um, oh, Savannah, this one came up. How did they get rid of the bears, and where were the bears when all of this was going on? So on a simple level, the bear situation was pretty. Reth knew. So a lot of what happened after the end of King, where the bear you see from Garward that the bears are kind of zealots and kind of a little bit off the frame. And because of what happened with Gari at the end of the story and what had to happen there in order for Reth to kind of keep the peace. Um, Reth was very much about keeping things calm, right? Because he knows he needs to get the bears out of Wildwood. But he also knows that with the wrong instigation, having seen grown up, that was who his father ended up having a war with, he doesn't want to kick that off again. So it was a lot. The reason you don't really see this in the story is because basically a lot of diplomacy, a lot of patience, a lot of negotiating with Galwar, leaving them alone a lot, and then sort of coming very gently and carefully to them as he sort of wants to develop things. So Reth took months, if not years, to actually get the bears to the point where they just left. And they left with agreement and they left with boundaries set. Like it was this whole diplomacy thing. They made an agreement about how this was all going to work. So, how the bears would be left alone, where the bears could go, and the wildwood anima would not interfere with them at all, um, and this kind of thing. So, um, there's not really a fun storytelling to give to that because I really saw it as one of Reth's sort of more mental um, exercises that he had to do as king. In terms of where the bears were, understand that Wildwood is fairly big. Um, I've never like because I'm not really good with the spatial geography stuff, so I couldn't tell you how big it actually is in measurements. I can tell you how long it would take to walk from one end to the other or from one place to another. So it's large, but it's not, United States of America large. It's a big space, but it's like a state as opposed to a country, if that makes sense. Um, and there are areas in Anima that are just not inhabited, or at least not by the wildwood Anima. Um, and so, what essentially, in a nutshell, what happened was the bears went back to the place where the bears live, which is outside of Wildwood. It's higher up in the mountains. It's a little bit of a colder climate, but it has some resources and stuff, and lots of caves and blah blah. And the reason the bears had come out of there was because there is more to be found in terms of food and stuff when they have a low year. Nature goes through cycles where there's more prey and other some years than others and stuff like that. So they have a low year, the bears come further down so that they can find more food and stuff. But really the bears don't want to be in contact with other tribes. Their preference is to be by themselves. So they were up in the mountains effectively. But the mountains that are sort of outside of the wildwood, the Anima's kind of ringed on three sides in mountains, and then there's the desert and the sea beyond that. And I know that sounds super weird, but it actually happens in some places where there's desert and then a coast. And that's what that whole area is between the two, between Wildwood and the other traverse. You have a canyon with mountains, and that's where the traverse is. That's where Laren and Sully went. You have this like river that literally flows into the sea if you follow it far enough, and the sands of the coast become the desert. And then there's on the other three sides, there's like mountains and basically non-traversable land for a while, and then it dips into the valley, and that's where you get the wildwood. So the bears, I can see it in my mind. If you were if the wildwood was like here for me, if the wildwood was here, the canyon and the midnight cliffs and all the stuff with Laren and Sully's over here. The sea is over here. The desert's here. There's mountains that go all the way around here, and the bears were kind of over here. So if they came through the desert and headed directly south instead of coming sort of to the southeast into the mountains, they would have hit the bears. Um, but the bears aren't interested in all of the stuff that's going. The bears, just to say, the bears wouldn't care if the humans killed all of the other anima as long as they didn't kill them. That's how sort of short-sighted they are. So they just stayed to themselves and weren't really aware of what was going on. They understood that there was some conflict, but the humans coming across the desert, that happened pretty fast in anima terms. So they weren't really aware of the actual conflict until after it had happened. But in the lead up to that, the bears were not down in the valley and they didn't know really what was going on at all. They just knew the things that, and instinctively, that there's some upheaval. And this is very similar because I have another question. Somebody asked where Baron was. Um, so I'll get into it with him, but there's a similar set of circumstances. So the bears were up in the mountains and just not really engaging with what else was going on. So they never really got involved in the whole human thing. But the reason they didn't get involved is because they're effectively avoiding everybody. Janelle asked what happened to Peg. And that's another story that I want to tell. So I'm not going to tell you. Sorry, did I have anything? Oh, yeah. So the only thing I'll tell you is that he did stay in Anima. He did remain in Anima, and he's happy. That's all I'm going to tell you. Because I hope to tell these stories. But I tell you what, I'll give you guys this. If we get like a year down the line and you're still here and you still want to know these things and I haven't brought it up, ask me again. Because if we get like a year from now and I can't see room for an anima story, chances are I'll probably just tell you the stories instead. We'll just do a big live and I'll just tell you the stories. Um, so what was the issue Baron described when he told Elle that the reason he and Holly were gone was because they were struggling? Was that something you planned on writing about? Yes and no. It was written into the plot, and I did originally intend to bring Baron back for there to be interaction between him and Reth before everything went crazy. But I think I've told you guys before, often when you're writing, you have these sort of milestones planned out. You know where things are going. But sometimes in the course of a scene or in the course of sort of developing a plot point while you're physically writing, something comes up in it that you hadn't thought of before and it works. And that was what happened with the arrival of the humans in Anima. There was a place in my outline where I didn't have it right yet, and I knew I didn't have it right, and I wasn't really sure why, and so I was writing into it to see if I could figure it out. And what it was what needed to be there that wasn't because I had pushed it out for these other things was the arrival of the humans. And it worked. It just set everything off, and I knew the minute it came into my I was like, oh yes. But that meant there were two or three little sort of side stories or side plots that we didn't get to explore. And one of them was Baron. So what happened with Baron and Holly? And he kind of lays it out for Elroth. He was reading the winds. He knew there was a problem. He knew he was needed and he was resisting. So, on a supernatural level, he's got the creator in his ear saying it's time to go home. And he's got his mate, who up to this point, we're talking years that they've been out, way out of Wildwood, living essentially on their own. But they would sort of touch in every year or so. They would come back, or every few months. Elroth saw them a lot more when she was young than she had seen them as she was older. So she would still see them. They would still come. But the older they got, the less they wanted to travel and this sort of thing. So at this point, it's been months since they've been in the Wildwood. And Baron's getting this instinctive instruction that he needs to go back. And he knew that it wasn't just you need to go visit, it was you need to go back, you need to be there. And he believed that Holly was not going to entertain that. So he felt stuck between the creator and his mate, and he did not like that. So he was resisting. He was basically sort of mentally, physically saying no to the creator. But on the flip side, knowing that he should listen to that, he's reading the winds. He knows that there's a reason that he's being told this. So he's sort of silently resenting Holly for being the barrier to that in his own mind without telling her that. I'm sure many of you have experienced this before, where somebody gets mad about something and they don't tell you, but they treat you like they're mad, but you don't know why. Um, and so that was what was going on between them. There was this conflict happening between them. And Holly was really worried about it because this is not like Baron at all to be sort of aggressive or irritable and negative that way. Um, and so they're unaware of what's going on in the Wildwood. They weren't even aware, at least initially, they weren't even aware that Elroth had taken dominance. They haven't had any contact. And so they decided that, or in their initial conversations when this was coming out and about the conflict, and Holly's saying, what's wrong? Why are you essentially upset with me? They decided that what they needed to do was get away. So when I say get away, it was they needed to be on neutral ground. Baron believed that getting her, because being at their home where she was so comfortable, she's always been a bit of a loner anyway, and the longer they had lived out there, the more sort of a homebody she'd become. Um, so he thought having her there, there was no way he was going to convince her or they were going to be able to have any kind of fruitful conversation. So they decided to go out to this place that for them is like a romantic sort of honeymoon-esque place. It's a place that they've been to before, that they remember, they have positive feelings associated with it, but it's not their home, right? So they decide to take this trip, to basically nut this all out, to talk it all out and figure out what they're going to do. While they're doing that, this all happens because it all happens in the space of like 3 weeks, I think. Um, I can't remember. I think it's only like 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a month. Anyway, point is, they're gone. They don't know. And then the earthquake happens, right? And they're not surrounded by anybody else, so they've got no point of reference for that. It's an earthquake. Earthquakes don't happen in Anima. What the hell is going on? They go home, they find their house like shaken and stuff broken, and so now they've got to figure out. And in the course of that, because they have decided to go back to Wildwood, now they've got to get all of their stuff together, right? So all of this stuff happens, and Baron doesn't even know. And the minute he shows up in Wildwood, of course, the very first people that they run into, they know who Baron is, and they know that they don't know, and so he gets the whole story, or at least the citizens' version of the whole story about what's happened to Reth and Elia and the voices and all of that. So he is broken up because he knows that it was his resistance. Had he not resisted, he would have been there in time. He would have gotten to see Reth. He would have got to talk to him, be a support, and he would have been there for Elroth too. Because he does take that responsibility really seriously. This whole brotherhood thing that they had, he meant it. Him and Reth, had Baron ever had children, it was kind of like being a godfather, only for them it's like a bond, right? Um, so yeah, so that's what happened. They were well and truly gone and out of communication. Um, and hated he hated missing Reth and Elia, but he hated that Elroth had been there dealing with this on her own, that he and Holly weren't there, because she's actually quite close to Holly, or she had been as a child. Um, so he knew that both of them had needed to be there and they weren't, and that's why you see him so emotional. Well, he's emotional about losing Reth, but he's emotional towards Elrith because he feels like he failed her. They both failed her. Um, so that's why he's sort of so overwrought when she sees him. But they do become surrogate grandparents. They move into the tree that Reth and Elia vacated, um, specifically to be there, to be close to Elroth and Aaron and their kids. That's literally the reason that they move in there, because Baron does not take on any sort of political or leadership responsibility. This is part of the whole thing that he and Holly figured out, was that really what she was scared of was losing him to the people, losing him to his responsibility. And he said, okay, well, let's just go be there for them, be a part of the society, be there for the family, but not be in this role. Um, and so that's what they did. Janelle asked the question that made me cry. What are your favorite moments in each book? So, I literally have 18 of them. So, there's 1,300 chapters, almost 1.5 million words. There's a lot of ground that we covered in these books. And I'm sure that I have missed some, but I'm just going to read them to you really fast because these really are my favorite moments. These are the moments that when I think about the story, these are the things that come into my head. And they're in chronological order, I believe. So, Reth and Elia dancing on the night she offered herself and was adopted, specifically the dancing and the offering. The interaction that they have there between the two of them is like one of the most meaningful moments to me emotionally in the whole story. Reth's vow to Elia when he knew he was going to send her back to the human world. That scene where they're in the bedchamber and she's against the wall and he vows to her and to Elroth. That's really meaningful for me. Um, Laren, when he finally figured out that Reth was good and that he was the one who had been wrong. And also when he figured out that Sully was his mate, because I was hanging out for that one. Um, oh, you guys might not like this, but I love the scene at the end of Beast when Reth believes Elia is probably going to die, and Brant is forcing him to face that, and he doesn't want to face it, even though it's a really difficult, painful time. The interaction between Reth and Brant's forcing him to face this and not letting him, you know, let it go, or just that whole way, the brotherhood slash father sonhood thing that goes on between the two of them in those scenes just hits me right in the feels. I love that moment when Reth's just completely emotionally distraught and aggressive with it, and Brent's like, "I'm not letting you do this." I love that. The moment when Reth saw Elroth for the first time, when she's laying on the bed between them, and he touches her, and she like grabs his hand. I think I can't remember exactly what the interaction is, but there's this moment where he's looking at her, and he's just like, "Wow." Anyway, I love that. And the moment when in the extra chapters at the end of Beast, when Reth comes home and he's all happy, and Elia's been trying to like sort out some time for them by themselves, and Elroth is so excited to see him, and he is so excited to see Elroth. I love Reth's heart in that moment, even though he's kind of once again oblivious to what Elia is going through. I love the father-daughter thing in that moment where he's like, "There's my girl," and she's like, "Daddy," and I mean they don't actually say that, but the way that they are between the two of them, I love that. Laren and Sully's first time, that always comes back to me. And I don't mean to be, suggestive. What I mean is there's an emotional fulfillment in that moment for them, that whole process that they go through that night. I just love that time. Elroth and Aaron's first kiss and also their honeymoon, even though those are pretty big, sort of spread out things. Um, the For me, the thing that's impactful about those is Elroth's sort of surrender to her feelings, because she's not really been a person to do that. And in both of those situations, she just kind of gives in. And I love that the dynamic shift between the two of them when she does that. Um, I love the moment Gar stepped up and was like, "Okay, y'all need to know what's going on." And he like lays out the whole thing with the prophecy, the disformed, and everything. And he's just like, "This is what's going on." I love that because all of the others would have been too scared that they were making the wrong decision to bring that out. Like the ones that knew, Elia, Gari, like all of them, they would have been really hesitant going into that moment. Am I doing the wrong thing? Whereas Gar was just like, "Nope, they need to know." And he was just like, "It's time." And he just did it. And I love that. I love that he just has that confidence. Reth's conversation with Aaron when Aaron got the letter from his dad. I That one makes me cry. And I love the love between the two of them, but I also love that Reth's respect for and desire not to minimize Aaron's dad. It's very complicated with the history, but even beyond that history, just the fact that here's a kid that Reth knows Aaron has idolized him, and he knows that he's had a big influence in Aaron's life, and he knows that he could use that to kind of shift how Aaron sees his own father, and he chooses not to do that. He chooses to encourage that relationship instead, and I love that. Both the times that Gar and Reth have their hearts to hearts, um, The first one when Reth apologizes to Gar. I love that one. And then again when Reth and Elia were having to say goodbye, were leaving. Um, I hate what Gar goes through in those moments, or that second one, but I love the openness that Reth has and the vulnerability that he has in both of those conversations, and that he never stops being a dad. Like, one thing that I really admire about Reth is that he takes responsibility for himself and his actions and his words. And when he went to Gar in both of those situations, he went knowing that he's the father and he needs to lead the way, even if Gar doesn't respond the way Gar should. Like, he was very intentional about, my kid is going to come out of this conversation feeling loved, whether he realizes it or not. And I love that about him. I love and hate Reth's goodbye scene with Elbreth. That was the hardest of those scenes to write, and I felt like Reth was saying goodbye to me, and I hated it. I really hated it, but at the same time, I love it. I love anything that kind of hits me really emotionally. I love the moment when Gar stands up, when the humans are there and they've got Rika, and he thought they were going to kill her, and he's just like, bring it. Like, he's done standing there, sitting there, trying to maneuver his way through this. He's gonna get in there. I love that moment because I know in his mind, he knows he's probably about to die. Like, he's probably writing his own death warrant, but he is going to take as many of them down as he can, and he's going to make sure she's safe while he does it. I just love his heart in that. He's very Reth in that moment. Um, I loved Reth being okay. So major spoilers here. If anybody is here who has not read the end of Queen, this is your warning. Get out now. Get out while you can. Um, Reth being Elia's protector in the Traverse, his complete certainty that if his love couldn't protect her, nothing could, and his complete surrender of his own safety and his own well being to keep her safe. Like, I don't know if it comes through in the writing, but for me, what I know he's living in that whole moment, the right from before when they said, she's like, we don't have any protection. He's like, doesn't matter. He's recognized this already. So from the minute they step in, that whole thing, all he cares about, literally all he cares about, is getting her through this. That's it. He has zero concern for himself. And I don't mean in a reckless way. I mean, he knows his purpose in that moment, and he will do anything he has to fulfill it. And his love literally manifests to as a tool in the hands of the Creator to keep her safe. And I love that. I don't believe that there is more love that a human being can show for another human being than to give up their life to save them or to serve them. And I've prayed for years to have that kind of love for people. I think that I can achieve it, like, for my son and my husband. It's probably the extent of it. And I'm humbled by people who will give themselves up for others. That kind of service, it just blows my mind. I love when Aaron comes back to Elroth as a wolf. And I love Aaron's moment at the end with his son when Aaron is trying really hard to emulate Reth. Like, he's really intentional. That's how he fathers, is he goes, what would Reth do in this situation? Like, that's how he models in his mind. But he hasn't realized that all he's actually doing is being himself. He's following his instincts. He still sees it as Reth's achievement that he's just modeling, but actually it's who he is. And I love that he can't see that, and I love that he continues to try to do it. Um, then there's also a couple of really cool, sweet moments that I'm hoping to get to write. So I'm not going to put them in the list, but maybe either if I get to write them or if I don't, maybe I'll add them later. So then, if you have any questions, this is the last question that I have written down. So if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll answer them at the end of this. Um, oh, or Kim. Nope, I haven't finished, but I'm here now. Okay, well, you heard. Excuse me. So, this question was asked in a variety of different ways by lots of different people. Why did you end the books that way? Is what it boils down to. Um, and I have to say it's complicated. What I've done is I have written. Those of you who've been in my Discord for a long time, you might remember last year I did a couple different scenes where I wrote a conversation with the characters, like me with the characters speaking to each other and having a conversation like a face to face. So what I did, because I was trying to figure out how to answer this without like putting myself into it too much, if that makes sense, is I wrote one of those scenes with Reth. And I'm going to post it on the book in a couple days. But you guys, if you're in the reader group, so that's the author Amy's tribe, you'll get to read that when we're done here. I'm going to post it in there and you can read it. So you don't have to buy. So there's going to be 4 chapters posted. I believe it's 4 chapters posted in the next 2 or 3 days. You don't need to buy those because you're going to get that content here on Facebook. So I'm just letting you know that ahead of time. If you see updates on Queen, don't get super excited. Unless you haven't bought Privilege, in which case get excited because you're going to get 4 new chapters this week. But the thing for you to know is that I always have purpose in what I write. To me, it's never just a story. There's always things that are true about life to share. And I talked about that a little bit in the author note. I think it was the second to last chapter. I'm not sure. It's somewhere in those last chapters. If you're in top tier privilege, you've already read that I talked a little bit about the purpose of why I was writing. In fact, it might have been right before those scenes. Um, and that's really true. Like, I really think I think fiction is a way to talk to people about life without confronting them with life, if that makes sense. So I always try to do that. I always try to bring things into my characters that are real, that I've seen happen, and I know and I wish the world dealt with differently, or things that I know confuse people, um, that I think I can give some insight into, or just realities of life that we all share. And I think there's benefit in having a sense of sharing an experience with people. So there's a lot of purpose, and the ending of the story, um, I hope, is meaningful, like meaningful on a real world level. Even though it's not the most romantic ending, it is the happiest of endings. And I also hope people will extrapolate, like put yourself in the position of being in endless perfection because there's nowhere better to be. There is nowhere better to be. Um, so, you know, yes, there's a time of separation now for those who stayed behind, but that's not forever. Everybody gets to be there. All of their loved ones, all of the people that are missing them right now, will get this with them. And I love the hope of that because to me, so often in life, we're like, if I just had this thing, or if I just got to this point, or if my relationship was just like this, or if I just owned that house, or whatever. Like we have these sort of either milestones or goals or things that we think if we could only get to that place, everything would be great. And that tends to be where romances end. They're happy together, they're in love, they don't want anybody else. Close scene. But life doesn't work that way. And to me, this was the only way to end a book where that was true. Like that was reality. End scene. Everything's perfect. Literally, everything's perfect. That was the only way to tell the truth of that because I hate when romantic stories stop right when real life begins. And I think that you guys have seen that, these stories, they go deep into the real life stuff. So I felt like I couldn't then just do this airy fairy ending. It's a calling. You don't have to agree with it. But I hope that you still see the joy in it and the hope in it. Because I do. So that's why. But anyway, you're gonna get this whole conversation between me and Reth. And also in that, I get to share a little bit of vulnerability in terms of, like I say, it hit me a lot harder that the Anima is ending a lot harder than I thought it was going to. And Reth is the one that I'm missing in that the most. I'm missing all of them. I'm missing the world, but Reth is the one that I was like grieving yesterday. So, pretty soon, we're going to end here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you fun little game that we're going to play, or at least we're going to play it in the group. So if you want to win something, oh wait, I better check and make sure that if there's any questions here. Um, oh, that's wonderful, Amanda. Yes, the Tales of Wrath and Elia are a little bit too perfect, I will admit. But my experience of real love is that the thing that you see between them is real and achievable, but it only sustains with hard work. So my husband and and you guys know, he is my Wrath, and really do mean that. Like he really loves me selflessly. But it's not like every moment of every day is this, hair flipping romantic joy. It's not at all. We have had terrible times. But the beauty of that is, and the thing that I'm so grateful for, is that when we hit those hard times, both of us are fully committed to getting through it, sticking together, working it out. And that's actually the real difference between true love and romantic ideals. Romantic ideals tend to tell you it's not hard, it's easy. When you find the right person, it becomes easy. It's only easy for a time in real life. And some of them never easy at all. But I mean, with the person that you're supposed to be with, or with the person who's right for you, it is easy at times and places, and it is often easy at the beginning. But what I see is a lot of young people, especially now, but not even just young people, who think that, well, it got hard, so it must not have been right in the beginning. No, it's hard for everybody. It's just peaks and troughs, right? So when we're in a peak, he's my Wrath. When we're not, I know that we can get there. And so I'm working to get there, and so is he. And that's what makes it sounds so stupid, but that like makes me giddy when I think about it. That I have somebody who's so committed to me and so certain that I'm the right woman for him, that even when he's really angry or we're really struggling or there's a big problem, life problem, he's not going to let that destroy us. And that is missing in too many people, male and female, in this day and age, I think. That's my little soapbox. So, I didn't want Reth and Elia. Yes, they do. They are a little too perfect. He does know a little bit too much about what to say the right thing. And she is a little too open and vulnerable, um, and able to get through those painful times. But the tools that they use are real. But it takes both people having those tools and being willing to use them for it to show up in real life, I guess. So, anyway, um, Caroline said, I love my husband, but if I could have one night with Gar, I'd take it. Not to put too fine a point on it. Um, I don't. So I'm gonna put this out there because it's true of all of my books. The books that I write now, the serializations on Web Novel, Dream, and Nova, are the first and only time that I have ever written love scenes. Prior to this, I wrote for a decade and never wrote a love scene. Um, and the reason for that was in part because I felt like um, they were often either unrealistic or they missed something that was really important to me, which was the emotional intimacy. So when I started writing them for the books that I have on Web Novel, and Beast isn't the first. All the books that are on Web Novel now, they all have love scenes. The only way for me to bring what I felt like, what I wished everybody had, what I felt like I get that I think most, not most, but a lot of women don't, um, was the joy and pleasure that comes from being emotionally intimate while you're physically intimate. Um, and I know that for a lot of people, there's a lot of barriers to that. So I'm in no way being judgmental. But I get a lot of women commenting on my stories about I wish I had a guy like that, or I wish I could do that with that guy, or whatever. Um, and what I want to offer is that the experiences that you see the characters have on a physical level, sure, they can be enjoyable regardless. But the thing that I think you're actually connecting with in these stories and in these love scenes is the emotional vulnerability that particularly that the men are giving the women, right? Because we don't see a lot of that. It actually happens, but we don't see it because it tends to happen behind closed doors. Um, and I do think that that's what a lot of women are missing in their relationships. Either they've been so hurt in the past by people who didn't give them emotional intimacy that they retreat from it now, or they give it but their partner doesn't. Um, and so, in this really creepy way, not creepy, I'm always modeling the interactions that my characters have on things that happen between my husband and I, but they might not physically, like, the characters can do things I can't do, for goodness sake. I'm a heavy, short woman. It creates limitations. I'm also well into my 40s, which creates even more limitations. I am not as adventurous as my characters anymore. Um, at least not in positions because I'm not capable of it. But at the same time, what the positions in the scenarios are doing is they're the vehicle for the intimacy and the pleasure that the two characters are getting by expressing their love for each other, right? So what I end up doing is taking experiences, physical and mental and emotional experiences I have, and translating them into things that the characters can visually do to bring that about. And I'm not embarrassed to talk about sex, but I also don't want to put other people in a position where they feel like they have to listen to or talk about something they don't want to. All I'm trying to say to you is don't lust after my husband. No, I'm just kidding. Um, what I'm trying to say to you is it's not Gar or Reth or Gari or Laren or whatever. That's not what you're actually. Don't get deceived about that. That's not what you're actually excited about. That's not what you're actually like falling in. What you're falling in is that connection that they offer to the female that they love, and that's what you want. And I'm saying that is, you can have that. Sometimes it takes, my husband and I did not have that for a long time. I'm going to tell you that. It took probably, gosh, it must have been, I'm trying to think in terms of years, 12 or 13 years of marriage, I think. I mean, there's always an element of it, but a good 12 or 13 years of marriage before I would say that I could have written these kinds of scenes. So, I'm just saying, don't give up. Don't give up. But also, big part, I realized later on, big part of that developing in our relationship was me letting go of my self-consciousness and me being willing to be, taking the risk to either be rejected or viewed in a negative way, to be vulnerable, emotionally and physically vulnerable. And that changed his experience, which then in turn changed how he dealt with me. And for us, it was a super positive thing. Super positive. So I have these conversations with women one on one. I don't normally have them on a Facebook Live, but here you go. If this is not something that you get to experience, but you have a person who loves you, my advice, in part, because it's not relevant to everybody, but if it's relevant to you, my advice is let yourself be seen, let yourself be expressive, and let yourself. So, what I do is I keep my eyes closed, right? Because the visuals for me do not do it for me. Make me super self conscious, super like, you can't possibly like that. Gross. Like I'm Elroth in that moment if my eyes are open. But what it does is when I put aside and let go of what if I look like this, or what if this happens, or what if that, what if he's, that used to just get in the way a ton. And I didn't realize how much it got in the way until I started letting go of it. And then because I was letting go, it allowed him to let go too. And it just changed everything. Or it was the catalyst. I shouldn't say it changed everything. It's time, it's maturity, it's love, everything grows, everything changes. But for us, that was the beginning of that process. Was me giving up on the fact that I'm fat and not traditionally attractive and going, I don't care. You want to see it? Okay, turn on the light, honey. Let's do this. And it did. It changed though over time. Like I'm not saying, I didn't go from zero to hero. Give yourself time if it's relevant. Okay, that's your unsolicited advice for today. I did not. That is not in my notes. It is not in my notes. I'm just saying. Anyway, wait. I have a question. This wonderful guy is an author like you. How can I support him to write more? I'm assuming you mean it's a guy that you know, um, that I don't know. The biggest thing that writers need, I think, is encouragement to. So the thing that I observe in other writers that was given to me that I'm really grateful was given to me is permission to suck. So the way to develop writing is to do it and do it poorly at the beginning and then get better and better and better as you go. But the only way to keep getting better is to be corrected, is to be told where you're getting it wrong. But many, many authors don't want to hear that. So it depends whether your friend wants to hear that. If they are literally asking for feedback and saying, how can I do this better? And you have the capacity to do that, do it. Do it gently, but do it. Do it for real. Don't tell them it's great when it's not great. If it's really great and it's just not getting like attention, that's just a reality of publishing. So just tell them to keep going. Tell them to not give up. I've been writing since 2009. I've been published since 2013. Well, 2013 was self-publishing. 2014 was when I got traditionally published. I've not made a living wage until last year. And even then last year, I made the living wage that like the kid who works at McDonald's makes. So yeah, you can feed a family on it, but only if you're like really tight on the budget. Um, so, this is not an environment for you see these big authors that make big money, they're not the norm at all. Very, very, very small percentage. So the main thing that writers need is people who want to see them keep going. People who want to see them succeed and are willing to just be there and keep going. Just don't stop. Because that's unfortunately what defeats most writers is a long process to get to a place of any kind of success, and they give up. So don't let them give up. That's my 2 cents. Um, okay. And then they just light a candle so they can see when. So, okay, true story. Conversation I had with my cousin. Both of us are not slim women, right? She was super, super hung up on it. I had been in the past and was coming out of that. And what she was talking about was how hard it was because she was trying to lose weight and she was struggling to do it. But the thing that I found interesting was her husband hadn't asked her to lose weight. She thought she needed to lose weight because she thought she wasn't attractive. And I was like, do you let him look at you? Like, do you let him look at you? And she's like, oh no, you know. And I'm like, most guys really want to look at you. Like, they want to see you. Oh, I couldn't, she went like this. And I got it because that's exactly where I had been just sort of 3 or 4 years before. And so what I did was I dared her to try it. I said, I dare you to go instigate or, whatever. Maybe you don't instigate, whatever. However it works when this next happens. I dare you to do all the things you feel like doing and not apologizing for them and not trying to say ahead of time, well, I'm going to do that. Don't make him analyze, right? Just react, just respond and be out of the covers. Maybe it's a light that's on in the bathroom with a little bit of light coming through, whatever you can do on your first try. But I'm like, just do what feels natural and stop thinking about how it looks. Stop thinking about how it's going to look. And if he stares, let him stare. And apparently that was quite a positive experience. That was my experience, and that was why when I answered that question about Reth and Elia in the list, and I said Reth just wants anything with her, but he wants to look at her. That's been an experience that I've had, and also something that I've heard from many, many men. I know it's not true of everybody, but I think it's a pretty consistent thing. Guys like to look. They're very visually tantalized. Um, and being the person that makes them excited by looking at you is a good thing when you want emotional intimacy, right? So I'm just putting that out there. I think we are our own worst enemies sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes. I'm not suggesting you develop emotional intimacy with an abuser or anybody who is destructive. I'm saying if you're in a relationship with somebody who you know loves you, this could be a way to make it more fun. And I have to say, the older I get, the better it gets. So this whole thing about young hot people, I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. When I was young and hot, because I look back and I'm like, man, I had no clue what I had. Um, it, I just didn't have a clue. Anyway, you all probably know this. I need to get going. I'm sorry. It's really late. You've been here for a really long time, and I'm very, very grateful. I'm going to go into the group in a minute, and I'm going to post a two lies and one truth um, thing about the 7 characters. So it's Reth, Elia, Elroth and Aaron, Gar, Rika, and Laren and Gari, I think. Anyway, it's basically the major names. Um, Two truths and a lie. If you want to enter, and this is to get some of the mystery swag that I can't show. Some of it I can't show you, and other stuff I don't want to because I don't know who's going to get what. But if you want to enter for that, all you need to do, I'll be done in just a minute. I told my husband I'd be done at 3:30, and he's like now standing in my door. Do you want to come say hi? Come say hi. We were just talking about you. Oh, come say hi. Oh, okay. He needs to do that. So his mom super sick and almost died last weekend, and she's actually doing a lot better. Like the joke is she's Lazarus. Um, but that was his sister calling. Otherwise, he would have come in. Because a couple of you asked me to interview him, and I was going to, but things have been so crazy this week that we just didn't end up doing it. Um, so, go into the reader group. Is anybody in here who's not in the reader group? And I don't mean my personal profile on Facebook. I mean it's called Author Amy's Tribe. Is there anybody in here who's not in that? Because if that's where I'm going to post the two truths and a lie, and all you have to do is write the name and the number of the because each under each character there's 3 statements, right? One, two, three. So you have to pick the lie. So you go Aaron, blah, Reth, blah, and that'll be your entry. And so the top 2 or 3 who get the most answers right will definitely get swag, and then everybody who enters goes in the draw anyway. So you have a chance even if you get every single one wrong. Um, yeah, no, it was last weekend, literally on Mother's Day at 3 in the morning, because she's over in New Zealand and we're here. Um, his sisters were trying to get in touch with him and ended up calling my son because somebody had the wrong phone number. Yeah, we literally we thought we were like packing our bags this week and heading over there, and she had a procedure, and it's like her whole body just went, "Wee, we're so much better now." And the procedure, like she got warned ahead of time about resuscitation and stuff because they really were like, "This, you might not live through this." Um, like it wasn't a might, it was a you need to prepare to not live through this. It was a very, and it wasn't a major procedure. It was just because there was an infection and she's 91 and it was a big deal. Anyway, we're all glad that she's better. We don't know if she's going to stay better, but for right now, she's better. So thank you for coming and sharing all of this with me. I mean, I think I get more fun out of answering these questions than you guys probably get listening to me. Because I was just like, they want to know. I'm so happy. This is the stuff I love to talk about. And you guys are the only people I get to talk about. Everybody in my life is like, "Who's the guy on your cup?" I'm like, "It's my major character," and they're like, "Sweet," and they walk away, and I'm, "Oh, okay, yeah, cool. Oh, he's really cool." Um, so yeah. So thank you for feeding my addiction. If you haven't already, I have two new books out. One is on Dream, and the other is on Nova. And the best way to find Nova is to search Novel Star on Android phone or Fantasia on an iPhone. And the one on Dream is called His Stolen Luna, and it is a werewolf story. My version of a werewolf story, continuing with my disclaimers that I don't read werewolf stories, so mine's probably going to have some stuff in it that makes no sense, but that's okay. The other one is a contemporary supernatural, so it's people in the modern world, but it's as if the whole world of demons and angels is physically real. It's called Fated for the Demon Slayer. And I have to say, at least from my perspective, the guy is super hot. I'm just putting that out there. Um, So, yeah, if you want either of those, you can get links from my page or in the reader group. Get yourself in the reader group because that's how you can win some swag. And that's where I'm going to post the scene that is not being published anywhere else. At least for the next few weeks, it's not being published anywhere. And I'm the only one who's read it so far, so you guys get to share it with me. I hope you like it as much as I do because I really like it. Thank you for coming. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you, Janelle. Cole is hot. Cole is the one who's fated for the Demon Slayer. And I think he's super hot, but it could be just me. But I don't think it is. He's got some issues though. Okay. Well, I am gonna say goodbye and thank you again. JP is John Paul, and he's from that Cervantes mentioning. He's from his Stolen Luna, which is on Dream. Yeah, I love them both too. They're very different guys, but they also. Anyway, I hope you'll read them because I like them. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, ladies, for coming and being a part of this. And thank you for all of your support and encouragement to me. You are my dreams come true. I really do mean that. I've been dreaming about this kind of thing since I was 7. So I'm going to go make sure that my husband's mother is okay. And then I'll get that stuff posted in the group. And I will talk to y'all later. Thank you for coming.